Welcome to the 2015 version of the Daily Review, starring covalent bonding today. Before we talk about covalent bonding, just a real quick refresher on chemical bonding in general and how you can tell what type of bond is going to take place. So just based on the periodic table position, a lot of this is easy if you just know what you're looking for. So remember, on the left-hand side of the stair step, we have our metals. And on the right-hand side of the stair step, we have our nonmetals. And so we talked about ionic bonding, and ionic bonding forms between the transfer of two elements, and that would be between a metal and a nonmetal. So anytime you have a metal reacting with a nonmetal, we know it's going to be ionic. Now we're going to talk about covalent. With covalent compounds, we're going to only focus on this side of the periodic table. So with covalent bonds, we're looking at the formation of a bond between two nonmetals. So how can you tell by looking? If you see a metal and a nonmetal, automatically you say it's ionic. If you see two nonmetals together, then we're going to say it's covalent. And we're going to learn some different terms to classify those covalent compounds based on how they share their electrons. So covalent bonding is the most common form of bonding between atoms. It's when we have a nonmetal combining with the same nonmetal or a different nonmetal. So if it's the same, we're going to have one type of covalent bond. If it's a different nonmetal, we're going to have a different type of covalent bond. We will never see any electron transfer taking place in covalent bonding, and you'll never see any ions being formed. So when we talk in terms of conductivity later, covalent substances will never conduct electricity. So if we look at two hydrogen atoms combining, each hydrogen atom has its single electron. Would love to have two electrons, because if they did, they'd have the noble gas configuration of helium, but they don't. So when one hydrogen atom comes across another hydrogen atom, they can try to take the electrons from each other, but they're not going to succeed because they're equally matched. So the best thing that they can do is overlap their outside energy levels and share those two electrons. So each one has a single 1s1 electron. They share those electrons. Now they each feel like they have a 1s2 configuration. But their difference in electronegativity is zero. Each hydrogen atom has the same strength. Neither one is strong enough to take the electron from the other, so they have no option but to share. So they're going to form a diatomic molecule. So diatomic, two-atom molecule. And I told you in class today that it was Professor von Hofbrinkel who discovered that the elements that make up the letters of his last name also form diatomic molecules. So it's hydrogen, oxygen, fluorine, bromine, iodine, nitrogen, and chlorine. You'll never see them singly by themselves. They will either be in a compound or they will be with their twins. Now, if we have two unlike nonmetals combining, one of them will have a greater electronegativity than the other if they're not the same. So remember, we determined electronegativity, again, based on periodic table position. The trend in electronegativity is that as you travel down a group, electronegativity decreases with increasing size. As you travel across a period, electronegativity increases with decreasing size. So as an atom, the smaller you are, the tighter your charge cloud is, the higher your electronegativity will be. So if we're looking on the left-hand side, just for the nonmetals, again, remember when we talk covalent, it's always two nonmetals. We're going to look at the position. So if we have element A and we have element B, we can see they're not the same nonmetal, they're different. The electrons when in a compound containing A and B are going to be more strongly attracted to the B atom because it has a greater electronegativity, which means its nuclear charge is a little bit stronger, and so it has a little bit greater pull on those electrons. Not so much that it takes it from the other atom, like it would in an ionic bond, but just enough so that those electrons hang around that nucleus a little bit longer. So we're going to end up with something called a polar bond. So polar bonds are unequal sharing of electrons in a bond. And that unequal sharing is because one atom is a little bit stronger than the other. So how can you tell? Check that difference in electronegativity. Now if we look at measured values, any difference in electronegativity between 0 and 1 would be nonpolar covalent. 1 to 1.67 is polar covalent. And if your difference in electronegativity is greater than 1.67, that means you're a metal and a nonmetal. You're strong enough to remove that electron. So that's going to be ionic. Molecular substances. A molecule is defined as a group of atoms that are held together by covalent bonds. So the thing about molecules is they're formed from atoms. Atoms are neutral going in. They remain neutral as they form a molecule because there's no electron transfer. And as you pull them apart back into their pieces, they stay neutral. They go in as atoms and they come out as atoms. So they're neutral particles formed from atoms. They can be polar or they can be nonpolar. And that comes back to looking at the types of nonmetals that are forming bonds. If it's the same two nonmetals, they're going to share equally. They're going to be nonpolar. If they're two different nonmetals, then they may not be sharing equally, and we'll call them polar. Polar molecules behave as though they have a negative end and a positive end, even though the particle itself is neutral. They just act like they have charged ends. And that's also known as a dipole. And I gave the example today of a hydrogen reacting with chlorine. We know that hydrogen, even though it's on the left-hand side of the periodic table, it's still a nonmetal, and chlorine is also a nonmetal. If we look at the difference in electronegativity, we could tell by distance alone that they're far apart from each other, so the difference in electronegativity is going to be great. So that means we're going to have a polar bond. Which one of these atoms is going to be in charge of those bonding electrons or going to kind of have an unequal share in those electrons has to do with electronegativity. Since chlorine is further to the right, it has the greater electronegativity, which means its nuclear charge is stronger. So chlorine has its 7 valence electron, and here's hydrogen with its 1 valence electron. Chlorine is going to attract and keep that electron to its side more than hydrogen is. This electron still belongs to hydrogen, and then it will circle the hydrogen nucleus, but it's more strongly attracted to the chlorine atom, and so it's going to circle chlorine a lot more. So it spends more time at chlorine's house, goes back to hydrogen for a quick visit, and stays at chlorine's house a lot longer. That makes chlorine feel like it has an extra electron, and it's going to give it a partial negative charge. Hydrogen feels the loss of that electron, and it's going to pick up a partial positive charge. So now we've got 2 poles, one here and one here, and this molecule behaves like it has these oppositely charged ends. The molecule as a whole is neutral, but that's going to affect the types of substances that polar molecules make. So here's an example with water. Water is a polar molecule. It's made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Hydrogen is on the left-hand side. It's still a nonmetal, though. Oxygen's farther to the right, so oxygen has the greater electronegativity. So these electrons, these bonding electrons, are going to spend more time around oxygen's atom than they do their own. So as a result, since they spend more time around oxygen, oxygen's going to pick up a negative charge, partial, and each hydrogen atom is going to pick up a partial positive charge. So if we look at a group of water molecules, they're going to arrange themselves so that the positive hydrogen ends are close to the negative oxygen ends. And this will keep the water as a substance, as a liquid or a solid, because of the strong opposite attractive force. So every positive end is attracted to a negative end. And I'll give you a little demonstration about how water can be affected by charges tomorrow in its polarity. So polar molecules arrange themselves so opposing ends are near each other, and they tend to be solids or liquids at room temperature as a result of that. Nonpolar molecules have no opposing ends. Remember, that's an equal share of those electrons. The electrons spend the same amount of time around their atoms as they do the other atoms, so they don't pick up those apparent or those partial charges. So they have no attraction for other nonpolar molecules. If anything, they're repulsed by other nonpolar molecules, and they want to get as far away from each other as they can. So as a result, they're going to turn into gases at room temperature. Exceptions would be molecules that have large molecular masses and have a lot of inertia, so they can't be gases. So the naming is very, very similar to naming binary ionic compounds, but instead of looking at a metal and a nonmetal, again, we have two nonmetals. So which one goes first? We're going to have to, again, look at periodic table position, and we're going to choose the nonmetal with the lower electronegativity. So remember, as you travel to the right, electronegativity increases. As you travel down a group, electronegativity decreases. So if we're looking at two atoms, if we're looking at atom A and atom B, we would see that atom B is farther to the right, but it's way, way, way down in its group. So atom A probably has the higher electronegativity. If you look at atom A and atom C, it's easy to see that atom C is going to have the greater electronegativity because it's farther to the right. If we were looking at C and B, then B would have the lower electronegativity because it's lower in position. So you're going to take the lower electronegative atom and you're going to put it in the first position, and he gets to keep his full name. The one with the greater electronegativity, the one that's farther to the right or higher in position, is going to go second, and we're going to change its ending to "ide." So far that sounds very, very similar to naming binary ionic compounds, but the difference will come when we have more than one atom. We're actually going to name the numbers, name that little subscript as a prefix, and the prefixes we're going to use are mono, di, tri, tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, and deca. So here's an example. We have H2O. We know it's not ionic because it's not a metal and a nonmetal. It's two nonmetals, so it's going to be covalent. So we're going to name it using the covalent system. So we're going to pay attention to the prefix here, or the subscript, 2. So we're going to use the prefix for 2, which is di. So this is dihydrogen because there's two hydrogens. Now, how many oxygens do we have? We only have one. So we're going to call it monoxide, not monooxide, because you don't want those two vowels together. So it's going to be dihydrogen monoxide. The next one, we have carbon with 2 oxygen atoms. Now, we're not going to say monocarbon. If there's a single element in the first position, you just name the element. So this is carbon, and then we're going to name the 2 oxygen atoms as carbon dioxide. On this one, we have carbon, and we have 4 chlorines. So remember, the carbon is going to keep its name. We're not going to call it monocarbon because we don't name the single atom in the first position. This is carbon tetrachloride. Okay, so homework tonight, you were to read, I'll write it down here for you. I wanted you to read 241 through 242, and also read 248 through 251, and I wanted you to do 13 through 17 on 249, and also finish that naming and writing chemical formulas worksheet I gave you on Monday. I think there's like 5 more problems on that to finish up.